for everyone. So I'm going to talk about workflow diagrams, as it said in the title, in blended learning. A bit of background about myself. I've been working in learning technology for a long time, 20 years or so, in higher education, from setting up learning centres back in the 90s with CD-ROMs. I think somebody mentioned CD-ROMs earlier, and laser discs as well. And I've worked at the University of Manchester, introduced iPads there, done a lot of work in the medical school there, and I'm currently working at the University of Huddersfield, where I'm responsible for introducing a blended learning curriculum into the nursing programme, working with the colleagues there to really sort of introduce technology and introduce a blended learning approach. Give you some background on this. The School of Nursing at Huddersfield, we've got 4 different pre-reg nursing routes with 4 different fields. So we have adult, child, mental health, and learning disability. And we have 2 intakes a year. So it's a fairly complex situation with different routes and different fields and multiple intakes. To give you an idea of scale, the BSc September intake is around 300 students, and then there's another January intake which is smaller, but you can see the sort of numbers we're talking about. All students also need to complete 2,300 hours of clinical placement, so they go out on placement at least once a year and complete that number of hours in order to qualify for as a qualified nurse under the Nursing Medical Council's regulations. So in about 2019, Health Education England wanted to increase nursing numbers, as they still do, and so they launched 10 pilot blended learning courses, or they launched this blended learning course within 10 universities. And the idea is that the students would not come onto campus, particularly they would work, they would learn from home predominantly, so learn remotely, but do their placement near to home as well. So the University of Huddersfield was one of those 10 universities, and we admit blended learning students onto our programs, and it represents around about 15 to 20% of our intake. So, you know, in September we get around about 50 or 60 blended learning students. The challenge was then, or the challenge still is because it's still ongoing, is to create integrated blended learning experience for all our students. What we didn't want was to sort of say, well, those students get a blended learning experience, but the campus-based students don't. We wanted to make sure that all students got a blended learning experience. So it was turning the curriculum into a blended learning approach. So we look at some blended learning principles. This is taken from a mix of literature. We wanted to make sure that there was a mix of integrated synchronous and asynchronous activities. That though we were promoting interaction between the students, so it wasn't a passive thing. There was always interaction. They went through that learning process. The learners were to be exposed to a variety of learning activities, so it wasn't just one particular thing, but they went through a whole range of activities. That we use different media within that sort of learning, particularly the asynchronous side, that we use a different range of media, and the technology, whatever technology we use, enables the students to communicate to each other, particularly when we think those blended learning, or the students on the blended learning program were sat at home the majority of the time. We wanted to make sure that they could interact with each other and with the students on campus as well, and that the learning is scaffolded and becomes more complex as and realistic as the students gain more confidence. Sounds easy, but all we had to do then was apply this to the module content that we already had and redesign the curriculum. So the first approach we took with this, we took this approach on our simulated placements. So we have around 300 hours of simulated placements where the students don't go onto a physical ward, but they do their learning through a mix of of synchronous and asynchronous activities, which represents a sort of a nursing placement, and they learn the same sets of skills. And we thought, well, how can we adopt those principles I've just talked about and build it into a student journey? So we went through a very sort of simplistic exercise of linking some activities together, and we took our inspiration, if you like, or we took our practice from best practice in simulation. So we start with a briefing session, okay, telling the students what's expected of them, what they needed to do. Then we'd give the students time to prepare with some various resources. So the first one would be, the briefing session would be synchronous. The preparation would be asynchronous. Then they'd do the activity, which would be a mix of synchronous and asynchronous. Then we'd carry out a debrief session to say, give them feedback, tell them how they get on, etc., etc. Then we'd round that off with some reflection activity, and again, that could be synchronous or asynchronous. And then we would repeat this for the number of activities we wanted to take them through in order to achieve the learning outcomes. Okay, sounds simple. It's obviously not that simple. The challenges to that were several, but the main ones were connecting the activities together. We had a number of activities. We took them through that loop on this particular simulated placement where we wanted to really build their team building skills and leadership skills. We went through that cycle, that we wanted them to go through that cycle about 3 different times. As Hoffman says, failure of blended learning often stems from failure to truly weave learning experience together. I've seen too many blended learning curricula that are just, or we'll have a synchronous session, then we'll have an asynchronous session, then we'll have a synchronous session, then we'll have 2 more synchronous sessions, and they're just bolted on, and there's no connectivity and there's no flow for the student beforehand. So it's about making sure those activities really build on each other and really connect. And there's also the problem of connecting technology. We the piece of work I've previously done with a colleague, we mapped different interdependencies between elements within the curriculum to see what those dependencies were within a blended learning system. If you wanted we built an ontology, but essentially we identified that any successful blended learning is dependent on a range of different elements that have to connect together. So those technologies have to knit with each other, whatever technology you're using. So if we look at our student journey again, it looks simplistic, but once you start to overlay it with the different technologies we're using, it soon becomes very complex. And that we needed to devise a way, or I needed to devise a way of thinking, well, how can we make sure those technologies work with each other, not just talk to each other, but there's a flow of data and there's a natural flow for the student. What I didn't want was the student jumping off one piece of technology into another one, having to log in again. It had to be a seamless journey. We had to make sure that there was a real flow here. So we developed a workflow. So I'm sort of from a sort of an IT background. I'm familiar with unified modeling language, where you develop sort of system requirements and model systems through a set of swim lanes, and usually the swim lanes relate to particular actors in the requirements. So this person does this, or this system does this, or this whatever. And I thought, well, maybe I could adapt that in order to identify the different parts of this blended learning scenario, identify what they do, and make sure the connections are there. So that's what I tried. So I set out this grid, which you can see here. I just need to make it bigger so I can see it. So the first lane that I put in, the first swim lane, was the asynchronous activity. So that our VLE is Brightspace. So I made sure that all the asynchronous activities were logged in that lane, and that they put them in the sequence they occurred. So you can see arrows there, but I'll come to those later. But essentially, I just listed the things that the students would do asynchronously, and then I complemented that with the synchronous sessions the students would do, and started to connect those so that there was a flow. And this represents the journey generally. Okay, so there's a workflow, there's a flow for the students here. They do this, they do that, they do this, that, the other. Then I mapped on that the technologies that I would use for the asynchronous sessions, and also mapped on the technologies and support. And this was key. The students would be offered onto the synchronous sessions. So here I can see now where the technologies are being used, when they come into play, and where they connect up to each other. Then finally, and this again was fairly critical for me, it's what data was captured by these systems and could I use it? So I identified what data was coming out of those particular pieces of technology. And then you can see the dotted line where I fed those back into the debriefing sessions or other similar. So I could use that data to make sure there was a identifiable piece of feedback for the students. So doing this workflow allowed me to quickly see where the technologies were, where I needed to use them, where they fitted into the synchronous or asynchronous sessions, whether I needed to get the students out of that or whether it would cause a problem. So for example, within the synchronous sessions, in order to provide support for the students, in one of these activities, we built in YoChat or YoTeach, which is basically a chat room, and we could embed it into the synchronous session so they didn't need to come out, the students in where is a different piece of technology. They just went into they clicked on a link, went into the chat room, said, I need help or whatever. So it's about making sure those technologies work together and the flow of information is correct. So that allowed that sort of scaffolding, if you like. So here are a list of the benefits. It allows you to see how the activities connect with each other and build on each other. It enables that feedback and feed forward between the activities. You've got the activities, you can see where the data is, what data is generated by the technologies, and allows you to feedback that into the debrief sessions and feed forward from that. Say in the next activity, you will do this and you will use this information. Ooh. It affords a strong narrative to be created and explained to the students. So right from the get-go, if you like, at the start, you can explain, you can use that workflow in a more digestible format, I guess, to the students. Say, this is what you're doing, this is why you're doing it, and this is what you will get from it. It allows mapping and coordination of technologies, so you don't have duplications. You can see that everything will work with each other, and you can see where everything fits in. And it identifies those support points. At what point will I need to provide support to the students, and how will I provide that support to the students using which technology? Okay, so you can identify the gaps. If they're using a technology where there's no built-in support or there's no method of support, you need to build that into that. What does it look like? These are three of the activities from that piece of blended learning that we did. We did a little escape room in Gather Town. We did a murder mystery based in a hospital, and we did an infection control scenario. But by using that workflow, we were able to connect to these so that the first one fed into the second one, fed into the third one, and we could identify the data from each, which informed the second, if you like, and they gradually built up their skills and confidence as they work through this. Don't know if this video will play. So you can see in this that this is built in ThingLink. The students would go into this 360-degree sort of scenario as a group, and they would work their way through the clues. The suspects in each room where they can link. This is the YoChat, so they can call for help by they just click on that. They go into YoChat, YoTeach room, and they could ask for help. This was the data we were able to capture from the different systems that I've talked about, and using that workflow allowed us to see where that fed back into the debrief session. So so we used MS Forms within that scenario you've just seen with the murder mystery. So they had to identify. So I could take the charts from those and feed them back into the debrief session and say, this is how you did as a cohort. This is how many of you got it right. This is, and then go through the clues and the scenario to give them feedback on why they got it right, but they could see who'd got it right and who'd got it wrong. Equally, I could collect how long they'd taken to complete a particular activity. So one of the activities was the escape room. How long did you take to escape? And I could give a breakdown to the of the different groups on how long it took. We could capture part of the chat within the within MS Teams to demonstrate where they were working together as a team, either summarizing or agreeing. So it's about connecting those activities together. It's about connecting the technology together, taking the data, feeding it back through, making sure that there's a flow, if you like, to the narrative. Do students like it? Absolutely. Evaluation of all the blended learning activities, when we redesign them in this way, they consistently score over 90% satisfaction on all the criteria that we measure them on. And that has remained consistently high through, we've done about 4 or 5 iterations of this now, and it remains consistently high.